My name is Margaret Meserve. I'm a professor of history and associate dean for the humanities in the College of Arts and Letters. I am filling in for our usual host, Peter Holland, who's the associate dean for the arts because he's out of town this weekend. Today's performance and presentation comes to us from the Department of Music and the program in Sacred Music. Kira Duffy is the associate professor of the practice in the area of voice and also the head of the undergraduate voice area in the Department of Music and this program in Sacred Music here at Notre Dame. She has undergraduate and graduate degrees from the Westminster Choir College in Princeton. She's been a vocal fellow at Tanglewood in the Berkshires for 2 years running in 2006 and 2007. And she's a recipient, more recently, of the prestigious 2017 Lincoln Center Award for Emerging Artists. She's appeared with many of the world's most important orchestras, opera companies, chamber music presenters, with a long list ranging from the Metropolitan Opera to the Lyric Opera of Chicago, the Berlin Philharmonic, New York Philharmonic, Chicago Symphony, Boston Symphony, LA Philharmonic, London Symphony, and many more. She's received especially widespread acclaim for her portrayal of Bess McNeil in Missy Mazzoli's new opera Breaking the Waves in 2016. Her performance was called Fearless by the New York Times, Extraordinary by the Wall Street Journal, and Absolutely Spectacular by Opera News. She was featured in the New York Times Arts section, in a profile by the Times music critic Zachary Wolfe, and her performance was named the best female operatic performance of 2016 by the classical radio station WQXR in New York City. And Kira is joined today by Päivi Ekroth, a native of Finland who is a soloist and chamber musician in her own right, as well as a choral accompanist and vocal coach and frequent performer in chamber ensembles. She has performed in her home country as well as in Estonia, Italy, Germany, China, New Zealand, the UK, appearing at numerous festivals. And she's been a recipient of numerous awards from various organizations like the Arts Council of Kymi, the Arts Council of Finland, the Alfred Kordelin Foundation, and the Finnish Cultural Foundation. And she has served as a collaborative pianist at the music department here at Notre Dame since 2004. Today, the title of the presentation is Phantom of the Opera is Not an Opera, what it actually means to be an opera singer in the 21st century. Now, before any presentation, I would ask you, but I think before a presentation of this character, I will especially ask you, please make sure to have your cell phones turned off and any possible sources of distracting noise muted. And with that, I will introduce you to Kira Duffy and Päivi Ekroth.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for coming today. Yes, I'm Kira Duffy. I am an opera singer. I am a sick opera singer, unfortunately, today. So I'm going to give it the old Notre Dame college try. But I ask your indulgence today if you hear a few snap, crackle, pops. So my talk, I realize, kind of sounds sort of snarky. Phantom of the Opera is not an opera. But it wasn't meant that way. It was mostly born out of conversations that I've had over the years when people find out this is what I do. So, you're at the doctor's office and you write down occupation. I write opera singer, and then people go, well, you don't look like an opera singer. And I say, well, that's funny, because I am one, but okay. Or you get, are you in Phantom of the Opera? I love Phantom of the Opera. It's such an amazing opera. I love the opera. And you kind of go, well, it's not really an opera, but okay. So I thought, there's a lot of mystery surrounding what I do. So I'm starting today in the Snite Auditorium. I'm dispelling the myths one by one. You saw it first. So I guess the first thing to be said is the designation opera singer is actually kind of a misnomer. What would be more accurate is to say that I'm a classically trained singer. And if we wanted to get really specific, we would say I'm a singer trained in the Western classical style, because of course there's classical music in India, for example, which requires a totally different set of technical skills that I couldn't begin to execute. When people will say, you know, oh, so do you sing opera? I think what they're asking is, do you sing in a classical style? It's important to clarify that opera is not in and of itself a style of singing. Opera is a genre. So as a person who's trained in classical singing, I train to present sort of a trifecta of musical styles. So there's opera, which is like La Boheme, Madame Butterfly. Has anybody, I'm sure a lot of you out here have seen operas. Show of hands. Oh my God. Okay, well, you're not the people I should be talking to. Well, we'll just, we'll have a good time today. You can spread the word for me. Right, so an opera is when I'm a character, I'm playing someone else, it's a narrative, there's plot, I'm in a costume, I am not Keira Duffy. Then the other genre is art song, which is a much more intimate genre of singing, meant for piano and voice, usually settings of poetry. I am myself in a gown. Usually the typical performance format is what we would call recital format. So I would be standing at the crook of the piano, singing. This art form sort of reached its peak at the late 19th century. So music of Schubert, Brahms, Fauré, etc. We'll get into that more in a second. And the third would be the concert repertoire, oratorio repertoire. So like Handel's Messiah, Carmina Burana, Beethoven 9. These are concert pieces where I am singing as a soloist, the soprano soloist. Typically there are 3 others, alto, tenor, bass. We're sitting in the front of the orchestra, and then we stand up for the solo selections. Does that make sense? So those are the 3. Within that, there are other nuanced categories like chamber music, which is when I would sing with a small instrumental ensemble, for example. Right, so a lot of stereotypes that are pretty pervasive surrounding operas. I'm sure we've all seen. For some reason, commercials still like to feature like a Zaftig woman, 300 plus pounds, going, oh, you know. There are some of those, they definitely exist, but actually there are a lot of opera singers that look like me. The other question I get asked a lot is like, well, you must sing in Italian all the time. And all opera is in Italian, right? Actually, not so much. I personally do not sing in Italian very often, although there are many operas that are in Italian. I actually sing most frequently in German and English, which I think people find surprising. But of course, when we train to be opera singers, we train in myriad languages, from Italian to French, German, even Russian, Czech. I've sung in Hebrew before. And there's even some classical music in Japanese, Chinese. I have not sung in the Far Eastern languages, but right. So the first selection, I'm going to attempt to sing, again, be kind, because there's stuff happening in here. Golf balls. Is an opera called, I'm doing a selection from an opera called L'Enfant et les Sortilèges. It's by Maurice Ravel. It means the child and the spells. This is such a whimsical, wonderful one-act opera. I actually just toured this in Japan back in February, March with the Seiji Ozawa Music Academy, which was so much fun, so fabulous. This is a really light piece, and it's sort of about a child, a very naughty boy, who's done a lot of terrible things. He's upturned all the books in his room, and so all of these things in his room come to life, and they come and they reprimand him. So you need to be a nice boy. It's based on writings of a woman named Colette, who was a famous French writer. This was premiered in 1925. I play the role, actually in this opera, I play 3 different roles. I play the role of the fire, so I'm literally a fire in a fireplace who's come to life to reprimand the boy. I also play the role of the princess, who's in one of his stories, and the nightingale. Today I'm going to sing the fire aria. This is kind of a tour de force aria. I'm regretting that I chose this now. typical opera, lots of high notes, lots of fast notes, really fun. And so the fire has come out, and she said, I'm very nice to the good boys, but I'm very mean to the evil ones, and you're being very evil. So you better straighten up, little kid. You're in for bad things. So it's kind of a party piece, really fun. I hope you enjoy it. Let's see if I can get this back on. I have to get rid of my Ricola. Singers always have these with them. I should buy stock in this stuff. Okay, I have a high C today. Phew, wasn't sure. Warm up was a little rough. Okay, so what I just sang, as I said, is called an aria. So aria means song, but it's used specifically for something that is excerpted from an opera. So it's sort of like the equivalent of a monologue in a Shakespeare play. So it's a solo selection from an opera, or the same term is used for solo selection from a concert or oratorio piece. And again, opera, of all of these different genres in which I sing, is definitely the most grand, the most virtuosic, the most larger than life. Although not always, sometimes it can be actually quite intimate. Speaking of intimate, as I said, at the other end of the genre spectrum is this art form called art song. Art song, it's sort of a difficult thing without getting into a thesis on how this came about, but to keep things brief, this was something that reached its peak in the middle of the 19th century in Austria and Germany. These are settings of poems, very often really high-level, erudite literary sources, again, set for just usually solo voice or at times duets, trios with piano. Ravel himself, who wrote the aria I just sang, wrote many beautiful art songs, but the father of the art song is Franz Schubert. Really extraordinary composer, died in his early 30s, 1797 to 1828. He wrote 600 songs, which is just sort of unbelievable. I think I've done something with my life, and then I hear about what Franz Schubert did. I thought, I gotta get on it. Wow. So, and we use the German term when we're describing the songs that are written by Schubert, Lieder. So you'll hear people say, I'm going to give a Lieder recital. The singular of Lieder is Lied, das Lied. So that means the song. In German, Lieder is plural, songs. I could go on and on about Schubert. He's one of my most favorite composers. obviously, having written 600 songs, he's written in a wide variety of styles. His songs can be very dramatic at times, but what he's most known for are these beautifully poignant melodies that are underlaid with shifting harmonics that were very revolutionary at the time. Up until Schubert, we were listening to the so-called classical forms of people like Mozart and Haydn. You sort of came to expect a certain harmonic structure. And Schubert came and, with other contemporaries of his time, sort of upset the apple cart in that regard. He would twist a harmony, put in a so-called blue note that audiences of that time certainly were not expecting. To our ears, it's not as shocking anymore. Nevertheless, if you go through and you really analyze what he's doing harmonically, it's incredibly complicated and, again, very evocative. Schubert loved to set, again, very important authors, people like Goethe, Mörike. The song that I'm going to do for you today is not actually a setting of a particularly notable poet. Schulze is his name. I've never heard of him. Anybody know who Schulze is? No, okay. Makes me feel better, thank you. But this is a classic example of Schubert taking a rather sort of bland poem, sort of your typical 19th century nostalgic, one might say sentimental poem, and turning it into something quietly profound. So the song that I'm going to sing for you is called Im Frühling. It's one of his most famous. It means in the spring. And I'll read you the translation. I sit idly on the brow of the hill. The sky is so clear. The gentle breeze plays in the green valley where, in the early spring sunshine, I was once so happy. This is so 19th century Germany. Alas, where I walked beside her so lovingly and close, I saw reflected deep in the dark mountain stream the beautiful sky, bright and blue, and her in the heavens. See how the gaily colored spring already appears in bud and blossom. Not all blossoms are the same to me. I preferred to pick them from the spray from which she had picked. For everything is still as it was, the flowers and the fields. The sun shines no less brightly, and no less invitingly swims in the stream the sky's blue image. But will and delusion transform themselves, and happiness and discord are interchanged. Love's happiness has fled, and love alone remains. Love, alas, and sorrow. Yet if only I were a little bird, again, this is so 19th century Germany, nature is really important. Over there on the meadow slope, I would stay among the branches here and sing a sweet song of her the whole summer long. Again, very, very sweet, very tender, but not particularly deep, right? But it's so amazing what Schubert does with this song. I am going to do my best to honor this incredible piece. So Im Frühling of Franz Schubert. beautiful song. It's just so beautiful. Just woo. And it should be said that, when people hear a song like this, they think, oh, that's lovely. It's not as hard as that first one she did. Actually, this is much more difficult to sing, and I would say Päivi maybe to play too. In the same way that Mozart can be very exposed, it requires real exactitude, both in pitch and rhythm. And if the voice goes a little bit funky or you play a wrong note, everybody knows. And also because this music has such a quiet intensity, you want to really honor this piece. Every moment feels like a very important gem. So as a performer, one feels a tremendous amount of pressure to do this kind of work real justice. And Päivi and I were discussing this yesterday. You always feel that you fall short because it's just so rich and again, so quietly profound. So moving on to the thing that's kind of been the bread and butter of my career, not something that I sought out. I'm sort of a natural opera person. I like to play a character. I like to hide behind a character, be in costume. But for a sort of random series of reasons, I have made my career singing a lot of concert and oratorio repertoire. I'm very happy never to sing Carmina Burana again because as I was compiling my CV for this job, I realized that there were about 4 years where I was doing 2 or 3 every season. If I never hear, I hear it on commercials sometimes and yeah. It's a great piece, but just not for me anymore. But of course, one of the great concert oratorio pieces is Handel's Messiah, of course. And a little fun fact, you guys all know because you're so erudite, but it's not the Messiah, it's just Messiah, okay? So just put that in your little pocket and take it with you. Right, so there are a lot of fabulous solos for soprano, alto, tenor and bass soloist in this piece. Of course, I'm sure many of you have attended concerts of Messiah. I'm sure many of you have performed in the choirs and perhaps even soloists. I know there are some in here who have. I'm not going to do one of the flashy ones today because we've covered flashy, but I just want to kind of show you the style. So this is a piece that was written in the early 18th century. Vastly different style from this early 20th century piece that I began with and mid-19th century piece. And this is an important point just to show that as classical singers, we are expected to execute a very wide array of musical styles as well as languages with real panache. And so this is considered among the Baroque repertoire, the Baroque period preceding the classical period, which is not to be confused with when we say the term, I sing classical music. This sort of is a general term that covers, say, from the late 16th century all the way up until the current time. Within that, there are smaller periods, and so we've got the Baroque period, which is 16th or 17th and early 18th century. Then we have the classical period, which is Mozart, Haydn. Then we get the Romantic period, which is Schubert, and then we get into really crazy modern, postmodern, contemporary, neoclassical. We don't need to go into that today. You come to my classes, I'll give you the whole spiel. So in Baroque music, specific sort of demand that is placed upon the performer is that one ornaments. So oftentimes you'll see what is on the page, a very simple melody, but the expectation of the time was that a singer would have in his or her bag of tricks a whole bunch of flourishes that they would add to this basic blueprint. This is a fairly simple melody this is probably not the best example of that, but if you know the melody, you will hear that I add little things called trills. It took me a long time to do that, and it takes I see some of my students in here. This is one of the more difficult technical things that singers have to master. We also will fill in notes. So, for example, in this, there's you could do instead of beep, 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 you go beep-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. So you're just sort of expected to know how to do this. This is difficult for American singers living in 2018 because we're not immersed in this style. But anyway, so you get my gist with that. So this is How Beautiful Are the Feet of Them from Handel's Messiah, a lovely G minor lilting melody. Before I forget to mention is both in the case of the first aria that I sang and in the Messiah arias that these were written originally for voices and orchestra. Obviously, I couldn't bring a whole orchestra with me today, so I want to thank and bring special attention to my incredible pianist, Päivi Ekroth. If you wouldn't mind giving her a round of applause. This is the role of a collaborative pianist is so important. By the way, we don't say accompanist much anymore. It's very passé. We say collaborative pianist. Another one of those FYI, it's just Messiah, collaborative pianist. And it's definitely not accompanist. We get that a lot too. Not accompanist, no. It's a very important job for singers, and it's, obviously a pianist like Päivi has to be incredibly virtuosic, have a very high level pianistic ability, but beyond that, they must be able to listen, almost read our minds, right, Päivi? Yeah, she's always reading our minds to see where we might breathe, where we might take a little time. That requires just an incredible intuitive sensibility, a lot of expertise. But the other thing, in cases like Messiah, for example, or in the Ravel, is that they're trying to create with this instrument, especially this instrument's challenging, the colors of an orchestra. And that's what a fabulous pianist like Päivi is able to do. She's able to get absolute biggest bang for our buck out of an instrument like this. So we're at least sort of seduced into believing perhaps we're listening to a real orchestra. So could not do this without fabulous people like her. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is the subject that is closest to my artistic heart, which is the so-called classical repertoire of the 20th and 21st century. This is something about which I'm incredibly passionate because I feel very strongly that if we do not continue to cultivate high art works of the day, then our art form is going to die. Classical music is a little bit in a crisis, as some of you may know. But there is fabulous music being written right now by people who have many degrees. These are not people who are just like singing tunes. These are people who are very high-level composers writing just fantastic stuff. And this particularly is the case in the United States. So I've made a lot of my career, in addition to doing concert repertoire in general, has been doing this kind of repertoire, some of which is extremely thorny. I spared you today. So no, but I do a lot of that stuff actually, and I like it. I know that's shocking for some people, but it is actually fantastic music. But the piece that I'm going to excerpt today is an opera called The Rake's Progress. Some people say The Rake's Progress because it was based on a British engraving of Hogarth. So it's up to you. I'm going to go with Progress. The Rake's Progress, written by Igor Stravinsky, who, of course, was born in Russia, but one of the most famous emigres to America, came at this golden age at the turn of the century with other fabulous composers. What is interesting about this piece, The Rake's Progress, well, first I should give you just the very general plot. Tom Rakewell, sort of an allegorical story. Tom Rakewell has been seduced by the pleasures of the world, and he's moved to London, and the story sort of tracks both his seduction and his subsequent decline into madness, as a matter of fact. I am playing in this today. I'll be singing the role of Anne Truelove. Not hard to kind of get who she is. She is his devoted love, and in this aria that I'm going to sing, No Word from Tom, I believe it closes the first act, maybe the second act. Tom has gone to London. She's heard nothing from him. She's a sort of meek person by nature, but she's sort of gotten empowered and said, I'm going to go to him. No, I'm going to find him. Love will conquer everything. She's just this beautiful, optimistic beam of light in an otherwise fairly dark piece. Some musical things to listen for, because this was premiered in the 50s. Stravinsky was actually he was a great imitator of styles, and so he is writing in what's called the neoclassical style. He was trying to imitate the structure and form of composers like Mozart. So it's not super atonal, but it is unmistakably of this period. One hears real angularity in the vocal line, and then there's that hallmark of Stravinsky writing, this serious rhythmic pulse, which you'll hear in the piano. It's such an idiomatic Stravinsky tool. This is incredibly challenging for all singers, especially the woman singing Anne Truelove. It's very rangy, lies up in what we call the second passaggio, right around G. So challenging. Anyway, I just want you to know that because I'm bringing this to you. I'm working hard for you. I love this piece. I'll never get hired to sing it. That's why I'm singing it today. You need a kind of a fatter voice for this piece. But anyway, I hope you enjoy it. I love this opera. I love teaching this opera. I love listening to this opera. In fact, what you should know is that one of your most illustrious alums, Paul Appleby, he graduated probably 10 years ago or so, maybe a bit more, from University of Notre Dame, has made the role of Tom Rakewell a total calling card and has, in fact, performed this at the Metropolitan Opera. He's performed it in France, I mean, really all over the world. So if you Google Paul Appleby, Rake's Progress, you will see an absolutely seminal performance of that role in this fabulous opera. So, without further ado, I go to him, the Cabaletta from The Rake's Progress. mercy. Whew. Okay, well, you've been a wonderful audience. That's all I have. So in the last 15 minutes, we'd like to open it up to all of you for any questions, any thoughts, concerns. Yes, back here.
Improvisation in Baroque, you compare that to improvisation in jazz.
Yes. So the comment was with regard to improvisation in Baroque that there are some parallels to be made with improvisation in jazz. Absolutely. And of course, to be able to execute improvisation in jazz, one must be very, very steeped in the musical language of jazz, which I absolutely am not. So I think actually something that really sort of gets my goat is when you see classical singers trying to sing jazz and not really being steeped in that style. It falls flat somewhat. Yes?
You had mentioned some of your students were here. I was curious, what is the academic training for what you do and what the students would do?
Sure, great question. So the question was regarding the academic training for our music majors. So we have a BA in music with a voice concentration for our undergraduates, and we also have a Master's of Sacred Music in which a quartet of singers is selected every year. The curriculums are a bit different. For the undergrad, I am the head of the undergraduate voice program, so I can speak a little bit more specifically to that program. We offer a really rigorous musical education. Our students take a full course of theory and music history, a full, theory 1, theory 2, theory 3, theory 4, music history 1 through 4 with some of the most illustrious scholars really in the musicological field worldwide. So that's really remarkable. They're also steeped in, they have voice lessons once a week, 14 lessons, give or take, every semester for 4 years. They are trained in Italian, German, and French lyric diction. Let's see, they participate in a number of ensembles, from the liturgical choir to our opera ND productions. They sing. One of the most amazing things about Notre Dame, especially for me, having come from let's say a not very well-funded little music school, is the number of guest artists who come here. So our singers have opportunities to sing in master classes with people like Deborah Voigt and Nathan Gunn, and we have one of the major Britain tenors of the day, Anthony Dean Griffey, is coming. And that's just a tiny little snippet of the really fabulous people who come. Erica, am I missing other things? I hit that, yeah. The Sacred Music program, I see our illustrious head of the program back there, Dr. Margot Fassler, is a little bit different. This is really a pre-professional program. These are people who have undergraduate degrees, generally in music, most of them in voice. And it's a very rigorous I think it's fair to say, very rigorous musicological education in addition to the performance requirements. These are people who are looking to go out and work in the church, as well as be very high level. Most of them are interested in concertizing, professional choral singing. That's a joy to work with them as well. So that's a sort of general idea. Yes?
Hi, so as a young opera singer, I know that many students like myself kind of struggle with the idea that we can make it in North America, when in comparison, Europe seems to have such a better kind of funding and also audience for it. So my question for you would be, how would you suggest that we could perhaps make a career in this in North America? Or do you think that we do have to go over to Europe to actually try to make a living wage?
Difficult question to answer today, but an excellent one. My personal opinion is that one does not need to go to Europe. There are certainly numerous opportunities there. one thing that a lot of young singers will do in Europe is what's called a Fest contract, and that's when an opera company hires a young singer and they work just at that company singing 8 to 10 roles a season in multiple performances of each role. And it's a wonderful sort of young artist apprenticeship type program. And of course, the added bonus is that you're steeped in another language and another culture. And certainly it is true that the funding at the state level for the arts in Europe is much more robust than it is here in the United States. It tends to be largely privately funded. That being said, even Europe is feeling the pinch, and a lot of those things have been pulled back in the last few decades. I think the biggest thing, what I say, this is maybe a bit of a cop-out answer, we could talk more afterwards, but you have to optimize all of the myriad skills that are required before you can even think about selling yourself. And that means having an absolutely close to flawless technique, vocal technique, number one, prima la voce, having a real command of the idiomatic sense of French, German, Italian, helpful if you also have these auxiliary languages like Russian. Being an excellent musician, musicianship skills get overlooked. And this speaks to a larger point, which is when you're starting out, when I started out, I had no intentions of being a new music singer. But I was a pianist for 15 years before I sang, which I'm forever grateful for. So when I got out of school and I auditioned for Tanglewood, they said, "Do you like new music?" And I said, "Yes, I do. I love it. Never sung any of it. Never touched it." But because I had such a great education and because I had strong musicianship skills, I could do this repertoire. And I found, gosh, not a lot of other singers can do this repertoire. So I started getting hired. So I guess the bigger point is that I optimized the things that I was really, really good at, but made sure that I was executing all of these other skills at the highest level I could. That's sort of a very general answer. We can talk more. Yes?
Really great performance, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks.
I wonder if you can say a little more about the Phantom of the Opera and what disqualifies it from being an opera?
Great question. So, Phantom of the Opera is a piece of musical theater that takes place, the story of it takes place within the old Paris Garnier Opera House. So I'm sure many of you have seen the old film from the turn of the century in black and white. I think it comes down to style, the kind of singing that is required. While Phantom does present the role of Christine, sings in a sort of imitation of the classical style, the actress who premiered it, Sarah Brightman, is by no means trained as a classical singer. She's a really good mimic, but if you asked her to sing a 3-hour piece in that style over a full orchestra, she would not be able to do it. Another important point is that Phantom of the Opera is mic'd. Most musical theater is mic'd. Part of this is by virtue of the fact that one has to sing 8 shows a week every week. And so if you have to sing like I was just singing 8 shows a week, you'll be dead. So with a microphone, you can sing this loudly, and a sound engineer can make it very loud. Yep. But also in the style, in Phantom of the Opera, there's a lot of belt singing, which is when one, at the most simple level, brings up chest voice. I'm the world's worst belter. I used to be really good, and I've lost it. But that kind of chest voice, thrust, straight tone, that's very prevalent in Phantom of the Opera. So it comes down to style, performance practice issues, and I think also the intention of the composer. I don't think Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron Mackintosh, the producer, ever intended it to be perceived as an opera. Now, we have heard of things such as like rock operas, like Jesus Christ Superstar, and I think they classify it that way. They're using opera loosely in the sense that the entire thing is sung, that there are no spoken lines, though the style is obviously very different. I don't know how to love him. I love that. When I was a kid, my mom loved that record. Does that answer your question, sort of? Yeah.
What are your thoughts about singing in English?
I love singing in English.
Operas that weren't written in English.
Okay. So the question is, what is my feeling about singing operas that weren't written originally in English? Great question. it depends on who's written the translation. So when I was a young artist at the Opera Theater of St. Louis, Opera Theater of St. Louis has a tradition of only doing opera in English. So as a young artist there, I prepared Rigoletto, Verdi's opera in English, Una Cosa Rara, which is this sort of obscure Martino y Soler, which was also originally in Italian, in English. I've seen productions that have fantastic, really clever translations that work really, really well. The librettist has a sense of what the voice can do on certain vowels. So the Italian composer is very clever. You know, they knew that for a soprano to sing this note on an ah vowel feels really, really good. And so if you see a lot of the great Italian operas, they, you know, will write like amore, amore, nice open vowel. Sometimes when you get a not very skilled librettist, in this case someone who's translating the Italian, they'll go, I don't know, leave me alone or something, going, leave me alone, and it feels terrible. So that is actually a very major consideration. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. What I like about it is the accessibility of it, because there's so much mystery surrounding opera, and people, well, I don't speak the language, you know, so they go and they just try to take in the experience, and they leave going, I think he liked her, and then I think he committed suicide, and I don't know, it was pretty, you know, right? I mean, that happens. It is an interesting thing as a performer when you are asked to sing in English, because all of a sudden you become much more conscious of your diction and wanting to really project the text to the audience. Now, most opera companies these days do use super titles because, to be fair, it is difficult to say, I love you, you know, up there and have people really know what you're saying. What note was that? That was so yeah, I don't mind it at all. And I really personally just enjoy singing in English. I like the feeling of it. It's a very silvery, every language has certain timbres and qualities that are innate. Russian has a very warm thing, я вас люблю, you know, it's very dark and it feels luscious in your mouth. And Italian is very bright, but it has a lot of space around it. But I like German and English. I like the sort of clarity of it. My voice is a sort of silvery quality. That's not me saying that. That's what people say. Oh, I have a silvery. But there is a sort of metallic quality to my sound. It's not a golden, warm sound. So Teutonic languages like English and German tend to lie in that same color world. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any more? Yeah.
You used the phrase fatter voice, which brings to my question. It seems to me that the upper ranges get all the attention. The sopranos have more fame than the altos,
Yeah.
and the tenors more than the basses.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Did everyone hear that? Yeah. It's a great question. It is true that the soprano and tenor thing is like very glamorous, but my confession is my favorite voice type, hands down, all day, every day, is the mezzo-soprano voice. I love Janet Baker. I love Lorraine Hunt Lieberson. I love the sort of richness of that color. I think it stems back, I mean, there's probably a scholar who could give you a much more thoughtful and thorough, comprehensive answer, but those were the voices that got a lot of attention. It probably stemmed from the castrati, the male sopranos way back in the day, who, well, I think we all know what that was. No beans, frank, but no beans. So, yeah, so these were male singers. I have a 3-year-old. I'm very good at euphemisms. But these were male singers who sang in the soprano range, and it was thrilling to I think we don't know what that was. We're not sure, but the documentation that exists says that it was, you got all of the thrust and the power that a male singer can bring just by nature of his physiology, but with these steely, ringing, gleaming high notes. So, and I suppose that one could probably scientifically measure our response to higher pitches, that perhaps at the neurological level we respond to these voices singing in extremes, in extremis, I suppose. But there is wonderful repertoire for mezzo-sopranos, contraltos, and baritones and basses. My husband is bass baritone, and I love the mellifluous melodies he sings. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but anyone else? Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you used to be really good at belting, and now you don't have that anymore. So, and I also know somebody who is classically trained. She used to sing mezzo, soprano, and now is alto. So I'm wondering, is there a stereotypical maturing of the voice?
This is an excellent question. In our last minute and a half, because the voice is in the body, the voice is at the mercy of many of the physiological changes that we all go through as we age. In the case of women, man, we really got it bad. I mean, hormones, having a baby, breastfeeding, menopause, all of these things have real implications for the voice. And so in the case of your friend whose voice dropped, it is possible that that was a function of her getting older, or it could be linked with some hormonal issues. I used to sing much higher, in fact, and as I got into my mid-30s, things just settled down. And in fact, I was discussing this with my colleague Alex Schrader, who is a tenor, and on our faculty here is fabulous singer. And when he and I started out, he was what was called a Rossini tenor, really high voice, sang high C's with E's. And he said around 30, they call it second puberty for men. And the voices tend to settle down, get a little bit more robust in the middle. As far as the belt is concerned, that I think is more a function of what I have been practicing technically for the last 20 years. So since I was 18, I've really been working on this kind of technique that utilizes what we would call, sort of in the vernacular, head voice. The whoop timbre is what they call it. Woo, right? So for classical singing, the big thing that separates female classical singers from musical theater belt singers is that we bring what's called the head voice or the whoop timbre very far down. Ooh, and we mix it with our chest voice, whereas a singer who's singing musical theater in the belt style is going, ah, and they're not flipping into, ah. That's flipping into head voice. Does that make sense? So the voice is endlessly fascinating to me. Anyway, I think it's time to go. Thank you so much for coming. You've been a wonderful audience.